after years of relentless effort, I graduated utterly alone. Days later, when I walked into my parents' home, my sister greeted me with a smirk. "Your degree means nothing anyway." My graduation day concluded with 37 missed calls and a single, chilling text message that read, "You owe us an apology." My name is Patrick. I am 22, and what should have been the proudest day of my life last June instead became a monument to my isolation. I had clawed my way through college with minimal support, a grueling balancing act of late-night shifts at a local diner, tutoring gigs, and various freelance assignments just to keep the lights on in my modest apartment. Graduation was meant to be the finish line, the moment I could finally demonstrate to myself, and perhaps even to my family, that I had achieved something worthy of celebration. Yet, as I stepped across that grand platform, the sea of faces in the audience held not a single one I recognized. Not my mother, not my father, not even my grandmother, a woman who had never missed a single Sunday church service in her entire life. The rows of vacant chairs designated for my family might as well have been spotlights, brightly illuminating my profound loneliness. You see, I have a younger sister named Julia. She is 20, a mere 2 years my junior, and has always been the family's golden child. The long-standing justification from our parents was that she was sensitive and required extra care, a convenient narrative that in practice meant she received anything and everything she ever wanted. When I was 16, she was adorned with new clothes and brand-name shoes, and she was given a car that I was explicitly forbidden from even touching, even on the days my own bike chain snapped, forcing me to walk 3 long miles to school. When she announced her pregnancy at 19, my parents miraculously transformed the situation into a modern fairy tale. She was no longer a frightened teenager who had made a rash decision. She was a glowing, young matriarch in the making, a beacon bringing the family closer together. They organized a lavish baby shower for her, an event so extravagant it could have easily passed for a wedding reception. And guess which date they meticulously selected for this grand celebration? The exact same day as my college graduation. Initially, I tried to convince myself it was just a terrible stroke of bad luck. Perhaps the venue they desperately wanted was only available on that specific weekend. Maybe they simply hadn't realized the dates overlapped so perfectly. I extended them the benefit of the doubt. I even placed a call to my mother a full month before the ceremony to gently remind her of the scheduling conflict. Her response was dismissive. "Oh, honey, we'll figure something out," she said breezily. "Maybe we can split the day somehow." But as the weeks ticked by, the harsh reality became increasingly difficult to deny. Julia's baby shower invitations were sent out, and not a single one included even a passing mention of my graduation. When I broached the subject again, my father's tone was firm and final. "Patrick, you will have plenty of ceremonies in your life," he stated, "but for your sister, this is a once-in-a-lifetime moment." I distinctly remember sitting in stunned silence, my grip on my phone so tight I thought the screen might crack. How could they say that? It was as if my own accomplishment held absolutely no value in their eyes, as if the 4 years of relentless, back-breaking work I had poured into my degree meant nothing. On the morning of my graduation, a sliver of foolish optimism remained. I kept checking my phone, compulsively looking for a message saying they were on their way. Nothing. I scanned the university parking lot as other students arrived with their families, arms laden with congratulatory bouquets and balloons. Still nothing. By the time my name was finally called, I had accepted the cold, hard truth I'd been avoiding. They were not coming. The cheers that erupted for the other graduates sounded muffled and distant to my ears. I walked across the stage completely alone, forcing a smile for the dean as he handed me the diploma that had cost me so many sleepless nights. Just as I stepped down from the stage, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, my heart skipping a beat, hoping they had finally sent a message of support. Instead, I was met with a text from my father. "You owe us an apology." My heart stopped cold. My eyes scanned the screen again, certain I had misread it, but the words were still there, stark and unforgiving, followed by a notification for 37 missed calls. 37. As if I were the one who had committed some grave error, the one who was expected to come crawling back to them after being so callously abandoned. I couldn't even begin to process the audacity. All around me, my friends' families were gathering, surrounding them with flowers, hugs, and flashing cameras. Meanwhile, I found myself sitting on the cold stone edge of a campus fountain, staring at my phone in a state of utter shock. That text message burned itself into my memory. What was I supposed to apologize for? For daring to exist outside of my sister's ever-present shadow? For having the audacity to strive for a sliver of recognition that didn't revolve entirely around her? I had a fleeting, powerful urge to hurl my phone into the water, but instead, I shoved it deep into my pocket and clenched my fists until my knuckles turned white. That was the moment the first significant fracture appeared in my relationship with my family. Until that day, I had tolerated the favoritism, endured the dismissive remarks, and accepted their endless justifications. But that text, that breathtaking arrogance, was the first time I felt the full, crushing weight of their twisted priorities. I did not respond. Not then, and not for the rest of that hollow day. I walked home alone, carrying my diploma in a plain university folder. There were no balloons, no flowers, no celebratory family dinner waiting for me, only the profound silence of my empty apartment. But deep down, I knew this was merely the beginning. That message was more than just a stab in the back. It was a declaration of war. And if this was the game they wanted to play, I was no longer going to sit on the sidelines. When I finally brought myself to look at my phone later that night, it was so flooded with notifications that it felt as though my family had convened a trial in my absence. My mother's voicemails started with that syrupy, patronizing tone she always used when she was trying to shame me into submission. "Patrick, honey, you need to understand this wasn't about you. We all had to be there for your sister. Family comes first, you know that." The next message had a sharper, more accusatory edge. "You've embarrassed us by ignoring your father's calls. Julia was crying because you didn't even bother to congratulate her. Is this really how you want to ruin her special day?" By the third voicemail, my father's voice was thundering through the speaker. "Pick up your damn phone and stop acting like a spoiled child. You've upset your mother, and you owe us all an apology for your selfish attitude." That word, apology, had been haunting me since the ceremony, and seeing it repeated with such conviction in their messages made something inside of me twist into a hard, cold knot. I sat on my bed, staring at the blank walls of my apartment, my graduation case still sitting unopened on my desk, and I reflected on how every single significant moment in my life had been systematically downplayed in the name of family unity. When I landed my first job at 16, they warned me not to brag because Julia was struggling in school. When I received my college acceptance letter, they decided it wasn't fair to discuss it at the dinner table because Julia hadn't bothered to apply anywhere. And now, the one day that should have been unequivocally mine had been completely sacrificed at the altar of her baby shower. 2 days later, I made the colossal mistake of visiting the family home. I walked in, foolishly hoping that a face-to-face conversation might make them understand the depth of my hurt. Instead, I was greeted by the remnants of her party. Pink balloons still taped to the living room walls, confetti littering the carpet, and a mountain of baby gifts stacked higher than the sofa. Julia was reclined in the armchair like a queen, idly scrolling through her phone, while my mother fussed over folding tiny, delicate onesies. "Well, look who finally decided to grace us with his presence," my father announced the moment he saw me. He didn't smile. He didn't congratulate me. He simply crossed his arms and gave me that familiar look, the one that meant I was already in the wrong before I had even spoken a word. Julia didn't even bother to look up from her phone as she said, "Did you bring a gift for the baby? We're still accepting them, you know." She said it as if it were a joke, but the smug smirk on her face told me she meant every single word. My stomach churned with a mixture of anger and humiliation. I had spent what little extra money I had on a new suit for graduation, wanting to look presentable as I walked across that stage. I had nothing left for another round of baby shower presents. "I came to talk," I said, my voice calm as I struggled to keep my rage in check. But before I could continue, my mother cut me off. "Patrick, this attitude of yours is just unacceptable. We had to make a choice, and we chose to support your sister because she needed us more. You should have been mature enough to understand that." I stared at her, waiting for her to laugh, to admit it was all a terrible misunderstanding. But she was dead serious. To her, it was that simple. Julia needed them, and therefore my graduation was irrelevant. "I needed you too," I said softly, the words spoken more to myself than to them. My father's eyes narrowed into slits. "Don't start with that selfish talk. You think walking across a stage compares to bringing a new life into this world. You should be grateful we're even here to celebrate with you now. Celebrate me." That was the phrase he used, and I looked around the room, still fully decorated for Julia's party, with not a single shred of evidence that anyone had remembered my milestone. There was no card, no stray balloon, no congratulations. Just piles of colorful wrapping paper and baby rattles. I realized in that moment that they didn't believe I was worth celebrating. I was nothing more than a footnote in the grand story of Julia. Julia finally set her phone down and graced me with a condescending smile. "Don't sulk. You'll get over it. Besides, you'll probably have another graduation when you go for your master's, right?" This one was just practice. Her casual cruelty knocked the wind out of me. She genuinely believed that my 4 years of relentless work, of struggling to get through college debt-free, were nothing more than a dress rehearsal. I left without another word. As I walked towards my car, I heard my father call out after me, "You're not welcome back here until you learn some respect." The door slammed shut, and that was it. That week, I watched as Julia plastered pictures from her baby's shower all over social media. There she was, glowing in a floral dress, surrounded by mountains of gifts and adoring relatives. The comments poured in from extended family. "So proud of you, Julia. You're going to be a wonderful mother." not a single mention of me or my graduation. It was as if I had been completely erased from the family narrative. I had held out a sliver of hope that an aunt or a cousin might at least reach out privately. But when I saw them in person a few weeks later at a family cookout, the truth hit me harder than any online silence. "You know, Patrick," my uncle said with a chuckle, "you really shouldn't have skipped your sister's big day." That was pretty selfish. My aunt chimed in. "Yes, we were all there and it was beautiful. Your absence really cast a shadow over things." My absence. They framed it as if I had made a conscious decision to boycott, as if I had purposefully snubbed my sister's event just to wallow in my own self-pity. No one considered, or perhaps no one cared, that it was the other way around. That night, as I lay awake in my silent apartment, I felt something inside me begin to harden. For years, I had told myself that if I just worked hard enough, achieved enough, my family would eventually have to notice me. But I realized now that no amount of personal achievement could ever compete with Julia's position on the pedestal they had built for her. And as much as it hurt, that knowledge came with a strange, cold clarity. But I wasn't ready to act. Not yet. First, I needed to see just how deep their favoritism truly ran. A few months after graduation, I kept my distance. Calls went unanswered. Texts were left on read. Invitations to family gatherings were politely declined. I told myself I was done chasing their approval, done contorting myself into knots just to feel like I belonged. But blood ties have a way of pulling you back, especially when guilt is woven into every word your parents have ever spoken to you. By the end of the summer, I was cautiously entertaining the idea of a reconciliation. My grandmother, the only person who had ever shown me consistent, unconditional support, had been calling, wondering when I was going to visit. She still believed in the best in everyone, and a small part of me hoped that things had cooled down enough for a fresh start. That fragile hope did not last long. One Saturday afternoon, I drove over to my parents' house. The front door was wide open, and the sound of laughter spilled out onto the porch. Inside, the main room was filled with relatives, pale green balloons, and a large banner that read, "Welcome, baby shower, round 2. I froze in the doorway. Round 2. Julia hadn't even given birth yet. Apparently, one opulent shower was not enough. My parents had decided to host another. As I stepped into the living room, trying to mask my disbelief, I noticed something else. Every relative was there. Aunts, uncles, cousins. People who had skipped my graduation without a second thought were now crammed onto couches, balancing paper plates of food and fawning over Julia's pregnant belly as if she were a visiting royal. My grandmother spotted me and rushed over, her face a mixture of relief and concern. "Oh, Patrick, you came. I'm so glad," she said, hugging me tightly. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of belonging, but it was extinguished almost immediately. When my father saw me, his expression hardened. "You weren't invited," he stated, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the surrounding chatter. The conversations around us quieted. "This is for family," he added, as if I no longer met the criteria. Something inside me snapped at that, but before I could respond, Julia called out from her throne of pillows and gift bags. "It's fine, Dad. Let him stay. He can make himself useful." She shot me a sickly sweet smile. "You can help carry in the gifts from the car. They're heavy, and I'm not supposed to lift anything." A wave of laughter rippled through the room, some nervous, some genuine. I stood there, frozen, as heat rushed to my face. Was this my new role? The court jester? The hired help brought in to haul boxes while everyone else celebrated. I wanted to walk out right then and there, but before I could move, my mother was at my side, her hand resting on my shoulder. "Patrick, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Your sister is carrying the next generation of this family. It's your duty to support her." Duty. That was the word she chose. As if Julia's pregnancy automatically superseded my diploma, my years of hard work, my entire identity. I clamped my jaw shut and followed Julia's boyfriend, Derek, out to the driveway. He was leaning against a shiny new SUV, a smug look on his face. "Oh, good." "You're here," he said, gesturing to the trunk, which was packed to the brim with baby gear, strollers, car seats, boxes of diapers. "We could use the extra hands. I'd help, but you know, bad back." He tapped his side with a theatrical wince, as if it were a shared joke. I lifted the first heavy box without a word, my silence the only defense I had against the rage simmering inside me. When we returned, the room erupted in a fresh wave of applause. Not for me, of course, but for Julia, who was holding up another gift and squealing with delight over tiny baby shoes. I placed the box in a corner and caught fragments of conversation. Patrick really should be more supportive. I heard he skipped the first shower out of spite. Poor Julia, having to deal with a jealous brother. Every whispered comment felt like another brick being laid in the wall they were building around me. They had not only abandoned me on my graduation day, but they had also rewritten the story to cast me as the villain. But the true breaking point didn't arrive until dessert. As everyone gathered around, my father tapped a glass with a spoon, calling for attention. "Before we cut the cake," he announced, "I want to say a few words. Julia, we are so incredibly proud of you. You have brought this family together in a way nothing else ever has. You've given us a purpose, something to celebrate. You are the reason we're all here today." The room buzzed with agreement and applause. Then he turned his gaze to me. "And Patrick, well, maybe one day you'll understand what it means to put family above yourself. Until then, we'll keep praying for you." The floor seemed to drop out from under me. My own father, in front of everyone, had just reduced me to a selfish, wayward disappointment. A wave of gasps and murmurs swept through the room. I could feel every eye on me, waiting for my reaction. My grandmother's hand found mine and squeezed it tightly, but even her quiet support couldn't staunch the wound. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just stood there, my graduation ignored, my accomplishments forgotten, as my family cheered for the sister who had never had to lift a finger to earn a single thing. And in that moment, something inside me irrevocably changed. The quiet resignation I had clung to for years hardened into something sharper, colder. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. This was a profound betrayal. I left the second baby shower without saying a word. No slammed doors, no shouting match, just a quiet exit out of the house and into the cool evening air. The sound of laughter and applause followed me down the driveway, muffled as I shut my car door but still echoing in my mind. As I gripped the steering wheel, I realized I hadn't eaten a single bite of cake, yet I felt sick to my stomach. My phone, lying on the passenger seat, lit up. New texts were already flooding in. I didn't have to look to know they were from my parents, likely admonishing me for my disrespectful early departure or for embarrassing Julia. I powered the phone off and drove home in complete silence. That night, I sat in my darkened apartment, staring at the diploma case on my desk. I hadn't hung it up. I hadn't even framed it. What was the point? Every time I looked at it, All I could hear was my father's voice declaring that Julia had given the family a purpose that nothing else ever had. My achievement was meaningless to them. I kept replaying that moment, the way everyone's eyes had turned on me, not with pride, but with judgment, as if I had committed some terrible sin simply by existing outside of Julia's spotlight. The days bled into weeks, and I began to withdraw from everything. I muted the family group chats, deactivated my social media notifications, and spent my evenings taking long, aimless drives through the city, anything to avoid sitting in the suffocating silence of my apartment. At work, I plastered on a professional smile, but inside I was hollowed out. Friends would ask, "So how was graduation? Did your family come?" And I would masterfully deflect, changing the subject before the lump in my throat could betray me. The loneliness was a physical ache. For so long, I had operated under the assumption that if I just worked hard enough, my family would have to see me. Now I knew the devastating truth. There was no finish line I could cross that would earn me their approval. They had chosen their narrative, and I simply didn't fit into it. That realization left me feeling empty. Even a trip to the grocery store felt heavy. Walking past young families, watching parents lift toddlers into shopping carts and share a laugh, I couldn't stop wondering why my own parents couldn't offer me even a fraction of that warmth. The hardest part was dealing with my grandma. She called often, her voice a gentle balm, always trying to bridge the gap. "Patrick, your parents don't mean to hurt you," she'd say, though her tone lacked conviction. "They're just caught up right now. Julia needs them." She wanted to believe the best of them, but I could hear the doubt creeping into her voice. I loved her too much to burden her with the full, ugly truth, so I would just say I was busy, that I needed some time. Then I'd hang up and sit in the silence, torn between missing her comfort and resenting the family she so desperately tried to protect. One night, a voicemail from my father cut deeper than all the others. His voice was calm, steady, almost rehearsed. "Patrick, your actions have been unacceptable. We've discussed it, and we can't have you back in this family until you apologize to your sister and to all of us. You are isolating yourself, and that's on you. We'll pray you come to your senses." There it was again, apologize, as if the transgression were mine, as if I were the one who had done the abandoning. I remember sitting on my bed, clutching my phone, my hands trembling with a rage I hadn't felt before. That single word had become a leash they expected me to place around my own neck. But somewhere in that fog of grief and anger, a new thought began to crystallize. If I was already the villain in their story, then maybe I didn't have to keep playing the part they had assigned me. Maybe I didn't have to spend the rest of my life begging for their approval. I wasn't ready to act yet. I didn't have the strength. But late at night, in the quiet of my apartment, I began to plan. Not grand schemes of revenge, not yet, but small, deliberate steps toward reclaiming the pieces of myself they had chipped away for so long. Framing my diploma, saving money for a place bigger than this cramped box, finding people who saw me for who I was, not just as my sister's shadow. It was a fragile resolution, born from pain, but it was a start. And while I didn't know what form it would take, I knew one thing for certain. If my family expected me to quietly play the role of the forgotten son, they were in for a rude awakening, because I was done being forgotten. The shift didn't happen overnight. At first, the changes were small, almost imperceptible, like planting seeds in soil I wasn't sure could sustain life. I started with my diploma. One Saturday morning, I took it to a local frame shop. The woman behind the counter, helped me pick out a simple, elegant black frame with a clean white mat. When I hung it on the wall above my desk, it instantly made the apartment feel less like a temporary holding cell and more like my own space. That piece of paper became more than a reminder of my family's absence. It was a testament to my own resilience. Every late-night shift, every paper I'd written at 3 a.m, every personal sacrifice, it was all there, staring back at me, and it was mine. The next turning point came at work. I had been at my entry-level job for a few months, mostly doing grunt work and keeping my head down. But once I stopped channeling all my energy into trying to please my family, I found I had a surplus to invest in my career. I started volunteering for the projects nobody else wanted. I stayed late, not because I had to, but because I was genuinely curious to learn the inner workings of the company. My boss, a woman named Valerie, noticed. One afternoon, she called me into her office. "Patrick," she said, "I see the work you're putting in. How would you feel about taking the lead on the next project proposal?" My heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't a glamorous assignment. It was dense with spreadsheets and market research, but it was a chance to prove myself on my own terms. I threw myself into that project. While my family was busy with gender reveal parties and newborn photo shoots, I was burning the midnight oil, studying presentation skills on YouTube, and refining my pitch until I could recite it in my sleep. When the day came to present, I stood before a panel of executives, my palms sweating but my voice steady. I laid out every data point with a confidence I didn't know I possessed. After I finished, there was a moment of silence before the department head said, "That's the most thorough proposal we've seen from a junior associate in years." Valerie gave me a small, proud smile, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt seen. Genuinely seen. The recognition came with a small promotion and a raise, which helped ease the constant financial anxiety that had been a knot in my chest for years. With that extra money, I upgraded my living situation. Nothing extravagant, just a one-bedroom apartment with more natural light and a kitchen that didn't feel like a closet. I painted the walls myself, filled the shelves with books I'd always meant to read, and bought a decent coffee machine. Slowly, the space began to feel like a reflection of me, not a reminder of what I lacked. But the most profound change happened socially. I had always been guarded, reluctant to let people in after a lifetime of feeling pushed out at home. As my confidence grew at work, however, I found myself opening up. I started saying yes to after-work drinks, joining a trivia team with some colleagues, and even letting a few friendships blossom into something deeper. A coworker named Alex became a close friend. He was the first person I told the whole story to, the missed graduation, the baby showers, the text from my father. I expected him to look at me like I was overreacting, but instead he just shook his head and said, "Man, that's brutal. No wonder you've been carrying that around. But listen, your worth isn't defined by them. You're building something real here, and they can't take that away from you." His words stuck with me. For years, I had been waiting for my family to validate my existence. Hearing from someone outside that toxic bubble that I didn't need their permission to be worthy was revolutionary. And the more I focused on my own life, the clearer it became. I wasn't powerless anymore. The contrast became starker whenever I made the mistake of checking in on my family via social media. Julia's feed was a meticulously curated highlight reel of new motherhood, baby's first smile, matching outfits, gushing posts about the miracle of life. But even through the glossy filter, cracks were beginning to show. Derek, her boyfriend, seemed to be less present in the photos with each passing month. Whispers from extended family members started to circulate about financial troubles and arguments behind closed doors. Meanwhile, my life was on a steady, upward trajectory. I wasn't rich, I wasn't famous, but I had stability, and I had earned it myself. The real game changer happened one evening when Valerie called me into her office again. "Patrick," she said, "I want you to consider applying for the management training program. It's competitive, but I think you'd be a strong candidate." My chest tightened with shock. Just a year ago, I was the kid sitting alone at his graduation, staring at a text message demanding an apology. Now, someone saw leadership potential in me. Someone thought I was capable of being in a position of authority. That night, I poured myself a coffee, sat at my desk beneath my framed diploma, and looked at the application. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about whether my parents would approve or if Julia would find a way to overshadow it. I was thinking about what I wanted and how far I had come. The power I had once so desperately craved from my family was finally beginning to build within myself. Still, the past hadn't disappeared. Their words were still there, a dull, heavy ache in the back of my mind. Even as I was building a life without them, I knew this story wasn't over. Because the family that had cast me aside would, inevitably, come knocking again. And when they did, they were going to find a very different man from the boy they had left behind. It was almost surreal how the tides began to turn. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one chasing scraps of approval. I was being sought out. My name started to circulate in higher-level circles at work, not just for the management program, but for having a knack for organizing chaos. I became the go-to person when a project was falling apart, the steady hand everyone turned to when deadlines loomed. That reputation built influence. When I was officially accepted into the management training program, it felt like stepping into another reality. Leadership seminars, mentorships with executives, strategy sessions, doors that had always felt bolted shut were now swinging wide open. Valerie, the sharp but fair CEO, took a particular interest in me. She pulled me aside after one presentation. "Patrick, you have something you can't teach, resilience. Don't let it go to waste. Learn how to leverage it." Her words became my new mantra. I threw myself into learning not just how to manage projects, but how to navigate politics, how to read a room, how to think 5 steps ahead. And slowly, I started to realize how those same skills could apply outside the office, because my family hadn't vanished. They were still there in the background, living their curated life online. Julia had her baby, a boy they named Noah, and the family celebrated as if it were a royal birth. My feeds were inundated with photos of my parents as doting grandparents, Julia swathed in pastel blankets with her miracle, and captions about how family is everything. Family is everything. I almost laughed out loud when I saw that one. They had completely rewritten history, creating a narrative where anyone looking from the outside would assume we were the picture of harmony. But reality has a way of seeping through the cracks. My cousin, one of the few I was still on good terms with, met me for coffee one afternoon. "Patrick, I don't know if you've heard," she said, leaning across the table, "but your parents have been asking around about you. They're telling people you're being distant, that you've lost your way. They're trying to spin it like you're the problem." My jaw tightened. Of course they were. They could never admit they had pushed me away, so they had to invent a new story where I had abandoned them. That same cousin also let another detail slip. Julia and Derek are having money problems. Big time. He's not working steadily and the baby expenses are killing them. Your parents are stressed. They've been covering more than they bargained for. I leaned back in my chair, the coffee suddenly tasting bitter. Money problems, dependency, cracks in the golden pedestal. For years, I had been the one scraping by, the one they dismissed while they poured resources into Julia's every whim. Now, with their chosen star faltering, the dynamics were starting to shift. And unlike them, I had built something solid, brick by painstaking brick, with no help from them. Around that same time, I was given the opportunity to spearhead a high-profile client account at work. It wasn't just another promotion. It came with a significant raise and, more importantly, visibility. If I pulled this off, my reputation would be solidified not just in my department, but across the company. I worked harder than I ever had before, channeling every ounce of past hurt and rejection into a laser-like focus. When the project was a resounding success, bringing in record profits, I was offered a permanent management position. My salary effectively doubled. My name started appearing in company-wide newsletters. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I moved into a sleek, modern apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the downtown skyline. I bought a car that started on the first try every single morning. When I walked into meetings, people listened. I was no longer invisible. That's when the first text from my mother arrived. "Patrick, love, it's been too long. We'd love for you to come over and meet Noah. He's getting so big, sweetie." The same mother who had told me I owed them an apology was now dangling her grandson like bait. A week later, a call from my father. I didn't answer, but the voicemail had that calm, authoritative tone I knew all too well. "Patrick, it's time to put the past behind us. Your family needs you. Noah needs his uncle." Those words echoed in my head. Your family needs you. For years, I had needed them, and they had turned their backs. The roles had been completely reversed. And as much as it ached, it also ignited something in me. Because for the first time in my entire life, I wasn't the one at a disadvantage. I was the one holding the power. They needed me. And that realization, that sweet, dangerous realization, was when the idea of payback truly started to form. I didn't answer their messages right away. In fact, I let weeks crawl by. Every day, my phone remained on silent. Every text went unread, every voicemail deleted without being heard. It wasn't about being petty, it was about timing. For the first time, they weren't in control of the narrative, and I wanted them to feel that shift, slowly and completely. Then one afternoon, I met up with my cousin again. She had a smirk on her face when she saw me. "You know, Julia's been asking about you a lot. Apparently she and Derek are in a really bad way. Your parents are covering their rent now, and with the baby, they're drowning." She paused, lowering her voice. "They keep saying if only Patrick would step up." Step up. That phrase resonated deep within me. For years, I had been overlooked, dismissed, and belittled. Now that their golden girl was floundering, it was my duty to step up. Not this time. That weekend, I dressed in my sharpest attire. A tailored blue suit, polished leather shoes, the kind of outfit that makes people sit a little straighter when you walk into a room. I drove my new car, gleaming in the sunlight, over to my parents' house. I hadn't been back since the day of the second baby shower, and as I pulled into the same driveway where I had once been ordered to haul boxes, a wave of memories hit me. I rang the doorbell. My mother's face lit up with a practiced, relieved smile. "Patrick, oh, sweetheart, you came." She pulled me into a hug that felt performative, too sweet, like something she'd rehearsed in the mirror. My father was in the living room, holding Noah, while Julia sat slumped on the couch. The baby gurgled happily, the only innocent soul in the room. "Look at you," my father said, his eyes taking in the suit, the watch on my wrist. His voice was a familiar blend of feigned pride and underlying resentment. "Doing well for yourself, huh?" "Better than well," I responded evenly, taking a seat across from them. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment before I continued. "I heard you've been having some trouble." Julia's jaw tightened at my words. "If you're here to gloat, you can leave." My mother rushed to smooth things over. "What your sister means is, things have been a challenge, Derek's hours were cut, and with the baby, the expenses are just overwhelming. We thought maybe, as family, you could help." There it was, the ask. They didn't even bother to dress it up. I leaned back, folded my hands, and met each of their gazes. "You want my help?" I asked slowly. "The same family who skipped my college graduation for a party. The same family who told me I owed them an apology while I was sitting alone on the biggest day of my academic life. The same family who made me feel like an unwelcome stranger in my own home." The room went dead silent. A flush of red crept up Julia's neck and my father's eyes narrowed. "That was the past," he said sternly. "We need to move on. Family is about sacrifice." "Funny," I replied, a small, humorless smile touching my lips. "Because I sacrificed for years and all it ever got me was silence. Now you want my help. Why? Because the golden child isn't shining so brightly anymore." My mother gasped. Julia shot to her feet. "How dare you?" she spat. "You have no idea what it's like to raise a child." "You're right, I don't," I said, standing to meet her gaze. "But I do know what it's like to walk across a stage completely alone because my family decided a baby shower was more important. I know what it's like to be erased from every family conversation because my sister needed all the attention. And I know what it's like to build a life from scratch without a single dollar or ounce of encouragement from any of you." Their faces were a canvas of shock, anger, and dawning humiliation. I let the weight of my words settle in the room before delivering the final blow. "You made your choice that day. You chose who mattered, and now I'm making mine." I slid a card onto the coffee table. Not a check, not cash. Just my business card, sleek and professional, with my new management title embossed on it. "If you ever want to treat me like family, you can start by acknowledging who I am now. Not the forgotten son, not your backup plan. But the person who learned to stand on his own when you all turned your backs." Then I walked out. I didn't shout. I didn't slam the door. I just left the same way I had all those years ago. But this time I wasn't broken. I was in control. The next day I checked my phone, dozens of missed calls, a barrage of texts ranging from pleading to furious. One from my mother read, "Patrick, please, your sister is in tears. We never meant to hurt you. Can't you just help us this one time?" Another from my father, "You're being selfish again. Family is about sharing, not holding grudges." But I didn't reply. For the first time, their crisis didn't feel like a burden I was meant to carry. It felt like justice. The weeks following my visit were some of the strangest of my life. For years, I had been the one reaching out, the one calling, apologizing, begging to be seen. Now my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. My parents oscillated between guilt trips and outright anger. My mother's messages were filled with desperate appeals. "Patrick, we just want our family back. Noah needs his uncle." My father, meanwhile, issued commands. "Enough of these games. Step up and be a man for your family." Julia, however, was pure venom. One text read, You think you're so much better than us now. Don't forget who had to sacrifice everything so you could go off and live your life. I stared at that one for a long time, marveling at the alternate reality she inhabited because I couldn't recall a single thing she had ever given up for me. I ignored them all. It wasn't out of spite anymore. It was a matter of principle. I owed them nothing. Every declined call, every unanswered message was a quiet reinforcement of my new reality. I was no longer theirs to command. The fallout was even more spectacular than I could have imagined. My cousin called me one night, her voice giddy with second-hand drama. "Your parents are losing their minds," she said. "They told everyone you refused to help, and now people are starting to ask questions. Aunt Ruth actually said to them, 'Well, maybe if you had treated Patrick better, he'd want to help.'" She laughed. "It's all unraveling. Everyone is finally seeing it." Then came the bombshell. Derek, my sister's boyfriend, packed a bag and left. No warning, no dramatic goodbye. He just vanished. The story spread like wildfire. He'd been buckling under the pressure, resentful of the expectations, and one morning, he simply walked out, leaving Julia with a newborn and a mountain of unpaid bills. My parents tried to keep it quiet at first, but that kind of scandal is impossible to contain. The whispers soon turned to pitying looks at church, and the pedestal Julia had occupied her entire life finally wobbled and came crashing down. That's when their desperation hit its peak. My father showed up at my office building. He didn't make it past the front desk. Security called up to my office, informing me a man was in the lobby, demanding to see me. I calmly instructed them to send him away. I found out later he had stood there for nearly an hour, his face red and blotchy, before storming off. That night he left a voicemail that started with anger and ended with his voice cracking. "Patrick, we just need your help." But I didn't yield. It wasn't help they wanted, it was control. They wanted the old dynamic back where I was the neglected son, forever grasping while they pulled the strings. That person no longer existed. Months passed, and my life only became more stable, more fulfilling. I was promoted again, and my work was gaining recognition outside my own company. I took my first international trip, standing in an airport with a passport in my hand, feeling a sense of freedom I had never thought possible. I filled my apartment with the laughter of friends who genuinely showed up for me, who celebrated my wins without a hint of jealousy. Every step forward felt like reclaiming another piece of the boy they had tried so hard to erase. Meanwhile, the family that had once scoffed at my struggles began to implode. Julia moved back into my parents' house, her independence shattered, her fairy tale life reduced to tense silences and financial dependency. My parents, who had once boasted about their perfect, unified family, were now facing uncomfortable questions about why their son never came around, why their daughter seemed so bitter, and why their lives looked so different from the rosy picture they had painted for so long. The final, poetic moment came on my grandmother's birthday. She was the one person I had agreed to see, so I booked a small private room at her favorite restaurant. When I arrived, she hugged me tightly, her eyes wet with tears as she whispered, "I am so proud of the man you've become." That was all the validation I would ever need. But as the evening wore on, I saw my parents and Julia enter the main dining room. They hadn't been invited. They must have found out from someone else. They saw me across the room, in my tailored suit, surrounded by my friends and colleagues, with my grandmother beaming at the head of the table at the party I had thrown for her. They tried to approach, but the maitre d' intercepted them, politely informing them it was a private event. My mother called out, her voice trembling with desperation, "Patrick, please, let us in. We're family." The room fell quiet. All eyes turned to me. I stood up and walked to the doorway, looking at the three of them one last time. Their faces were a mixture of desperation and pleading, stripped of the arrogance they had once worn like a crown. "Family," I said softly. "Family doesn't abandon you on your graduation day. Family doesn't erase your accomplishments. You made your choice years ago. Now I've made mine." I turned and walked back to my table, and the maitre d' quietly closed the door behind me. My grandmother reached for my hand, her smile unwavering. The noise of the restaurant faded away, replaced by the warmth of the people who had chosen to be there. In that moment, I realized the profound truth. I hadn't lost a family. I had built a new one. And the old one, the one that demanded apologies and smirked while I stood alone, was left on the outside, knocking on a door that would never open for them again.